And so, good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Naylor, and I'm talking from South Portland, Maine. And today I have the great pleasure to have a dear friend, Greg, here to teach us about his journey as a type 8 powerful dynamic type. And just glad to have you here. And so maybe just start off and say how did you discover the Enneagram and what impact has it had with your life and others around you, and just see where it goes.
Sounds great. Good morning, Michael. It's good to see you.
You too.
And my Enneagram experience started, I think, maybe 25 years ago when I read a book by Richard Rohr. And at the time, I didn't think too much of it. I was interested in it, but I just kind of read the book. I think I identified my type, but it was very cerebral. It was just knowledge, which was kind of how my MO was back then more than now. And so I spent some time on it, but not much. And then I think maybe 15 years after that, Elise, my wife, who's a therapist, began using the Enneagram some. And somewhere around that time period, we stumbled on your workshops and began going over to the retreat center once a year. And I think that was my first deep dive into the Enneagram. And I think that was about 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly when. So it's been a journey since then. We've been to a lot of your workshops. We've done a lot of work on our own with it. We use it. I use it in my business. Elise uses it with her practice. We talk about it a lot in our family. It's just become sort of a common knowledge for a lot of the people in our lives when we're interacting with each other.
Well, so when you discovered or started to get a sense of, what your type is, the type 8, and, started learning about the best and the worst, the agony and the ecstasy of the type 8. I know for myself, when I was learning about the type 4, it was quite shocking, and took me time to absorb it. Only about 20 years. But anyway, I just wondered for you, what has your experience been like in sort of seeing yourself through the lens of the type 8?
Yeah, I can resonate with you saying it took you 20 years to absorb it. I think I might be halfway through that journey, but I think it was pretty interesting. There were things about the type 8 that I identified with very easily and quickly. And the journey for me has felt a lot like there's probably in my less mature understanding, I was proud of a lot of those things. As I've gotten somewhat more mature, I think I've been through phases where I felt shame about those things. And then I think I've kind of emerged into a more comfortable place than that. So there's a journey of like ignorance almost of just being like, oh yeah, that's just the way I am. I may have told you this story, but I can remember there was a different assessment that a friend of mine used in his practice, and I took it, and one of the traits that I identified was it was called like diplomacy or something like that. And I scored off the charts as having no diplomacy, but being extremely blunt. And I remember at the time thinking like, yeah, that's how everybody should be. Like that's a better way to exist. And the realization of that's not, it simply isn't black and white like that for sure. I mean, I'm grateful that I can frequently say things that need to be said, and at the simultaneously aware that the way I say them needs to be more diplomatic than it used to be. So I've embraced traits, I've been ashamed of traits, and I think I'm merging into a more comfortable place where I can hold both of those things in tension and experience them together.
Well, I can certainly relate to that. As a type 4, the pride I had was in being emotionally honest and just eviscerating people with my good intentions of waking them up with my emotional honesty. And oh my God, it was just like I just had permission to do that. That's what a good person does. And little did I realize it was a safety valve for to make me feel better or superior to someone or to relieve my own sense of shame. But that was one that when I learned about the type 4, I felt like somebody had just stripped the skin off of me, and I went, "Oh my God, uh, this is uh, this is what I've been using habitually, and no wonder I'm not very happy, and people aren't very happy with me." So it was quite a shock, and there's been different layers of it as I've gone along. Um, so that's how it is. That's a 20-year, 25-year journey. So when you hear the type 8 described as the powerful, sometimes called powerful dominating type, or I like powerful empowering type, uh, what do you relate to in terms of that kind of capacity, that relationship with power and potency, and you know, being a voice that has impact and wakes people up or scares them to death, either way.
Yeah. Well, I'll answer that, but you just triggered a memory which I think is helpful. One thing that happened in my business maybe 8 or so years ago is we were doing an exercise where we were identifying the word that we identified with each other most freely. And one of the people who produces films for us, or did, he's no longer with us, but he, beautiful type 6 personality, and he said, "I'm afraid." When he thought of me, he said, "I'm afraid." And that knowledge just rocked me. I mean, I just had no sense whatsoever that this person who I had a really good relationship with, from my perspective, and felt really comfortable with. I trusted them implicitly. But the fact that their number one thing that they thought of was fear was extremely eye-opening. So that in terms of my relationship with sort of the power or empowering type or the dominating type, I think, a lot of it for me is just being aware of that perception and how I'm coming across. I certainly internally know that I feel very comfortable in situations where I need to provide some measure of the energy or power or direction or in chargeness or something. I often end up in situations where that's useful. Um, but being aware of the way that power plays out and how people feel about it has been one of the bigger growth challenges, and just learning how that is. I think I have had a similar situation with my kids where they would tell me like, yeah, when my friends come over to our house, um, there can be, a very magnanimous, fun dominant type, or there can be a very scary dominant type. And they weren't always sure which type they would encounter, uh, when they were younger, when they would have friends over, or when they were in our house. So even with my children, the awareness of like that I could be scary was very surprising to me. And now I look at it and go, well, of course, I see myself um, a little more realistically and realize like, yeah, I can see how those would be very intimidating circumstances. But for a type 8, I mean, because I don't relate to feeling that way, even though I can feel afraid, of course. In fact, that's a lot of the motivation for the type 8 is fear. But because I don't identify with feeling the fear and identifying with cowering under some other power or force or pressure, it's hard to relate to thinking of yourself as being the person who's exerting that kind of force and pressure that other people are afraid of. And I mean, that's one of the many one of the ways that I can feel very wounded as a type 8 is just that realization of that's how people feel. Um, and the disconnect between the motivation, which is so often trying to care for people and make sure things are just, and make sure people are taken care of, and sort of rooting for the underdog type. And the disconnect between that motivation and the experience people could have where they say, you're coming across too harshly or um, challenging too much is a real, there's a lot of wounding around that, at least for me at times.
And well, so you point to to one of the numerous wake up calls for the eighth, which we often call using too much force or too much intensity. And I was thinking, I was doing a workshop with a team of doctors several years ago, and the CEO who'd brought the Enneagram in was this really beautiful type eight, wants to help transform everybody, and he's just a sweetheart, big hearted, uh, gutsy, right out front. And so as he was up there talking to this team of 25 doctors, I said, Tom, hang on just a second. Are you aware of the power that you're exuding right now? That there's just a lot of intensity and power coming off you? He said, no, not really. So I said to this team of 25 doctors, anybody out there feeling a little bit scared right now? And like 22 of the doctors raised their hand kind of low. He said, really? Are you kidding me? I'm just doing my thing. And so it just points to, that in the spirit of really wanting to help, I have this other thing that I have to learn to be aware of, which is my intensity and whether it comes off too strong. And as you point to, because that doesn't bother you so much when other people do that, it's like, well, whatever, no big deal. But so why would that bother anyone? So it's just such another point of view to grasp. But I think it's really part of the inner work of a lot of the types, including the type 4. So how do you work with that? What sort of support do you get from people? Do you have somebody that waves a white flag when they're starting to dissolve into the atmosphere? I mean, what's helped you?
Well, I've been gifted with some great people in my life who are also somewhat aware, um, like I am. So I was going to tell one quick story before I go there, but you talk about that intensity. I can remember as probably a 5-year-old with a particular aunt of mine who would say, she basically was like, quiet down, tone it down. Like she's always giving me this feedback. And of course, when you're 5, you don't have any language about what that is. But I wasn't even aware that I was being loud or intense or driven or any of those traits that now I can identify with. I just knew that my family members were saying, be quiet and bring less of yourself is what I kind of took away from that. But in terms of my own awareness and the wake up calls, I've been gifted with a great partner in my wife, Elise. She will quickly and readily, especially now, identify when I'm being too forceful or scary or energetic or intense. And she deals with a lot of that. So when she's bringing it up, it's probably beyond just a little bit of intensity. It's real intensity. And so I trust her voice in that. She's a type 6. I have some other types at work who I think are just very good at pushing back on me. One of them is another type 6 who's really great at saying, like, she'll kind of amp the energy up too for different reasons, as a type 6. The bigger I get, and oftentimes the more she challenges, because she's wants to challenge authority, as a lot of type 6s do. They both want the authority and want to challenge the authority. And in this case, she's good at challenging the authority. And she'll often come back later and say, whoops, I'm sorry, I challenged so much of that authority. And I'm often saying, I really appreciate you bringing it and calling me out when I'm becoming too big and too intense. So I think people in my life they're definitely people who will, I don't know if they wave the white flag, but they will definitely point out when I'm being intense. I think a lot of the work I've tried to do is help me physically identify when I'm feeling this way. I know a lot of types will describe it this way, but there's a point at which I'm exerting power or intensity that definitely feels like a drug, and it can feel to a type 8 energetic and like this is exactly how it's supposed to be. And I think I've become much more aware of when I'm feeling that drug, there's a pretty good chance you're overexerting. Um, I mean, there's certainly a place for that still, I believe, in my, exerting my essence. But at the end of it, I think most often I have to be careful with that. I remember one of my mentors was talking about anger a lot, and he'd said, um, anger is a luxury for another man in a lot of cases. And someone said to him, like, well, Jesus got angry. And he said, well, you can trust Jesus with things that you can't trust yourself with. And I think that's a lot of my relationship with my over intensity is,
Yeah.
yes, it may be okay sometimes, but more often than not, you should probably check it. And it probably is not necessary to what you're actually dealing with right then and there. So there's a physical feeling. I feel it in my shoulders. I feel it in my chest. I have a biological reaction that says you're getting pretty intense. Try to check yourself. Now, I think my reaction is probably beyond when people are actually feeling it. Like they're feeling it first, and then I'm getting my biological reaction. So by the time I'm getting there, I may already be a little bit beyond where I should be. But that's another one of the wake up calls. And I think the last thing is just trying to get regular feedback from people, and checking my own experience with other people after the fact. So I'll have a particular interaction with someone where I'll have a question mark in my head about whether I was overly intense in that situation, and it's really good for me to have feedback conversations and revisit the topic and say, how did you experience me in that moment? Was I overly intense? And of course, when I ask certain types, they react differently than others. So I have a type 3 counterpart at work who's rarely challenging my over intensity, but occasionally I still am going, how did you experience that? And they'll give me good feedback, but I have to be sensitive to who I'm talking to also. But I think just having one-on-ones and saying, how did you experience me in that moment is really, really helpful.
Well, yeah, awesome. So I was just thinking of, in my work as an addiction therapist, and when I was clinical director at Serenity House, there was a beautiful type 8 counselor, and he was so good at just cutting through the bullshit, just like boom. And he was like, we work with a lot of guys who've gone through a lot of trauma. They've been hardened, they've been hurt, but he had a way of delivering that wake-up call that was shocking, but also said, I'm watching you and I care. Do you get it? And it worked so amazingly with these guys. They all loved him. Even if he kicked them out of the house, he would say, when you're ready, come back, right? But now you're not, so be gone, right? And I can remember at one point we were going to get rid of this one particular client because of his bad behavior. And I can remember he came in, he said, you guys are such suckers. You think the ones who are being nice to you are the ones who care about their recovery. You're like totally blind. This is the one guy who cares, and he's an addict. And what do people in early recovery do? They act like idiots. He's acting like an idiot, but this guy cares. And it just sort of blew us all away. And then we didn't throw the guy out because we thought we would. And then he became the champion of all the other clients, and is still doing great today. So there's that gift of calling a spade, and the precision, that kind of passionate, instinctive knowing, like I know when someone's bullshitting me and when they're just, making me feel good. He was a pro at it. And occasionally he would make a mistake, but they were always out front and bloody. So you just saw them and then you could talk about them, right? There was nothing subtle about anything he did. But so, you point to that question, how do I use this gift to wake people up? Because in a lot of ways, the 8s, when they're really present, they're really good at waking people up, sort of shaking up whatever the distorting material is so that they actually see themselves. And I was thinking of, Gurdjieff is one of my favorite teachers, was a type 8, and he would he had the ability to eviscerate people's delusions and then welcome them in with a big heart, if they didn't die on the way getting there. But there's so anyway, you point to that, and I think it's probably, I know it's a growth edge that we're all working. Like, when is my
Yeah.
emotional honesty useful? When is it torture somebody? And so anyway, so I appreciate that. So do you have something else you wanted to say in response to that, or?
Yeah, I really resonate with those stories. And I think I have a historical blood trail of some of those stories
Me too.
where I have overdone it without the right relationship and without context that's helpful. And I think as I've gotten a little bit older, I am able to be more emotionally real without the collateral damage that goes with it. So I find myself still in a place of often saying the things that need to be said directly, but being able to do that in a much, much different way where people can actually accept it and find it useful. In my work, that's really what people pay me for in a lot of ways. They're paying me to give them feedback on kind of where things are and to move them to a different place. And so I think I've learned more. I'm certainly not perfect at it, but I've learned more how to do that in a way that people can accept and move along rather than just going in with sword slashing and leaving all kinds of problems behind that from a relationship perspective just aren't useful for me or for them. I can remember an experience with a client maybe 10 years ago where they were questioning something about what we were doing. And I just, as soon as I started getting questioned, I started just laying in on well, here's what's really going on here, because I'm the one who has to tell you all these things. And it was just ugly, it was just not useful for them. I think I may have been well intentioned, I'm not sure, but it came across as being destructive and not like I cared about helping them. I was just defending our company's actions, and it just wasn't useful. And I think I'm much more likely to be able to have that conversation today and listen more. So one of this isn't a wake up call per se, but it is an important part of dealing with my type is, man, I've got to listen more than I talk in a lot of cases. And that's a lesson that took me a long time to learn. But I think today I can much more ask questions and say, tell me more about what you're experiencing. Let's talk about this. And I can still share what I think, but I can do it after listening and gaining some rapport with people that I probably didn't worry about 10 or 15 or 20 years ago nearly as much.
Yeah, well, thank God for growth and being able to get some distance from our patterns. I was, you mentioned something which I think is really probably true of all types. It is for me as a type 4. It's like whatever the pattern is that kind of puts us to sleep in terms of our objective experience also gets us high. Like, ooh,
Yeah.
that feels good. And so, the 8, it's like, oh, here we come, swords are flashing. I'm as high as can be. This is awesome until it's not. And then, as a 4 going into emotional intensity and just, really pouring it on and putting the fire on the gasoline and just being lit up. And then afterwards going, oh, no one's listening to me. I must have not done that correctly, but it's compelling, and it has an addictive quality to it. So great to notice, because I think it got developed as a survival unconsciously when we were just little ones. So we didn't decide to choose that when we became adults. But I was thinking, the other thing that came to mind for me is when I found out about the Enneagram, I had been in recovery for 15 years. And I was quite certain I understood everything about recovery. And I really wish people would listen to me. And they didn't, thank God. And then I read about my type. My therapist said, read the type 4. Just check it out, see what's there. And I felt like I just saw all of the unconscious patterns that had been running me, causing my suffering and my emotional superiority, arrogance, / lost in space patterns. And it was really and thank God for it, because I've been sober 15 years and I was still righteously miserable, I would say, and colorful in it. Like I was creatively miserable, and So anyway, I wondered what for you, that kind of unveiling. You've mentioned something about it already, but just any other things you'd want to add to that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The type 4 and the type 8, man, we can suffer, and it's for different reasons.
Mm.
Um, but my suffering. So I'm also in recovery, and actually, my most of my Enneagram work and my recovery work have been hand in hand, which has been really incredibly useful for me. But as a type 8, I mean, part of why I think I did not get to recovery sooner than I did is because I'm a type 8. And my willingness to continue to endure pain and suffering is just off the charts.
Mm.
Um, I could wake up every morning hungover and miserable and just feeling terrible. And as a type 8, you just say, well, that's just how life is. You just deal with that suffering, keep going. And your job is to keep going. And so I think that kept me out there, 10 years longer than I needed to be. But I guess we all get sober when we need to at the end of the day. But I definitely know as an addict, man, I could suffer. And some of those traits I think are actually, I've used them in certain beneficial situations. So I've done some endurance activities that it's really helpful to be a type 8 and to be willing to suffer. So I've told this story to a lot of people, but I did, when I got sober, I did a lot of racing. I raced mountain bikes, among other things. And I would do these 100-mile mountain bike races. So there's like 8 or 10 or 12-hour races. And it becomes a lot of mental ability as much as physical. And I can just remember, I'd be at like mile 70 and everyone feels like they're dying. Like they just feel like this, they're just going through the worst thing in their life during this race because you've been riding for 6 or 7 hours and you have many more mountains to go over and things. And I just know when I passed somebody or caught up to somebody, I would just smile this big grin and act like nothing was wrong with me. And I was totally fine. And I was not going to reveal any pain. And I could be drowning inside, just absolutely ready to just fall over and die, but I would not reveal that on the outside. And that's a lot of how my addiction went. I would just, man, I would make sure I would look okay on the outside, but inside I was just decaying. And so there's sort of, there's pros and cons of that. It's great to be resilient. It's great to be able to push through pain. Going through certain of those experiences is really helpful in developing a certain type of character. And at the same time, at least for me, I know I can suffer much longer than I need to before getting to lessons that I think if I were not so willing to suffer and be resilient, I would learn from. I think sobriety is certainly one of those where I just suffered for a long time. There have been other examples where I would just grit out of grit and determination, continue to deal with something for which there is a solution that if you stopped trying to fight everything and anything, you would get to much faster than if you're just walled up and armored up and just unwilling to like stop and look at your circumstances and think about them.
Yeah. Well, so I just want to follow that thought, which is this idea. It's almost like, for type 8, that it's like the position I unconsciously could take on as a kid is I'm on my own and I'm going to take care of myself because probably no one else will. So, and it's also sort of the, sometimes they should say the inner message is that needing people and being open to help is a sign that I've failed in my task as a type 8 to be self-reliant and strong and a leader and protector of others. It's like they get divided off inside a little one. and the idea of having this sort of, well, this gentle part of me that breathes in gentleness or allows my heart to be touched is in some ways the opposite of what I had to learn as a kid to protect myself. Unconsciously, I just went there, and I might even got rewarded for it. But I wondered for you what you notice around, that feeling your vulnerability or your heart, or being okay with gentleness. Because I've noticed, like with type eights, when they hug me, it's like boom, they give me this manly hug. It's like, wow, I've just been hugged by an eight, and it woke me all up. And which is very different than a type two that's all gentle and slips into your pocket and rocks with you, right? So I just wondered how you related to some of those themes.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about the hugging. I have a dear friend of mine who decided he was going to give me hugging lessons a few years ago. And he said, all right, now we're going to lean in gently and just warmly embrace. I'm like doing this bear hug,
Yeah.
all muscular, trying to like grab somebody. And again, one of those things that I have no idea that I had no idea that when I hug in an aggressive type 8 way until my friend told me. So now I do that thing where I'm very awkward and I'm trying to learn how to give a nice, gentle type 2 hug. But yeah, I think the pattern is kind of obvious about the type 8, but you're on your own. You have to be self-sufficient. You can't rely on anybody else, and to do so is to fail and to be weak and to be vulnerable. And so I say, describing just the way I experience it, I say, man, I armor up better than anybody. Like I can put on the impenetrable armor that makes the people around me think he needs nothing, he doesn't need me, he just is completely self-sufficient. And the great irony of the type 8 is how sensitive we are. So while I'm armoring up and looking really good, I'm also getting wounded by all these little things that are happening, and no one knows it because I won't reveal it. And how much we really care about things. My wife and I joke about my soft underbelly, that yes, there's this armor, but there's really this very soft interior space once you get there. And so a lot of my work has just been willingness to reveal and willingness to become vulnerable. I can remember I think we were about 10 years into marriage, Elise and I, and having a situation where our financial situation became very dire. And I can remember how much energy and courage and I don't know what else, but I just had to muster this enormous effort to tell her about our situation. And she's this type 6 loyal. She's like, okay, yeah, no big deal. Like, we'll figure it out. Like I had spent probably days thinking about how am I going to tell her that we have this really difficult financial situation. And I tell her about it, and it's not a big deal. And she still accepts me, and it's not the end of the world. And she was reaffirming, she's like, you'll figure this out, like giving me confidence that I didn't have in this situation. And I often remember that lesson, because for a normal person for a non-type 8, that's probably not that big that's not the same kind of initiative. But for me, it was like, man, it took all the energy and courage I could to talk about it. And then to realize, like, wait, that's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to reveal the problem. What a gift. I just, to remember that circumstance. And it's happened in multiple situations since then, where I've begun to practice being vulnerable and realize, okay, that the world is not going to come to an end because you share something that's vulnerable for you. In fact, quite the opposite. You're actually going to be connecting hearts with other people in ways that, as long as you refuse to be vulnerable, you can't. So just willingness to expose what I perceive as weakness, which might not even be weakness in a lot of cases, but things that I think are going to be weaknesses is just it's a big energy output for me, but always a um, place where my heart gets opened up a little bit more, and I'm able to feel a little bit more human and a little bit more of my true self when I do that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, uh, so I know I've heard rumors that people have suggested that you learn to meditate, sit still and follow your breath. But what's meditation for you? What works for you?
Man, nobody can get done more while meditating than I can. Um, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I've been trying to meditate more the last few years. I think you've been telling me that maybe for about 10 years. And so the last few years, I'm a slow learner in some respects, but trying to empty my mind is really, I mean, I know that's hard for everyone, but I just find it to be challenging. Part of my particular type eightness is very oriented towards action and always doing. Like when I'm sitting still, I'm doing something. Um, whether that's planning something, there's kind of a joke around my family, like we'll be like hanging out in the evening and when things are kind of powering down, and I'll be on my iPad doing something like, and I can just get very focused, and it's all about doing in a lot of cases. And um, I think I can't remember what they tell that, but or what the label is for this, but the type 8 is the do think feel, I think is the priority of how we process.
Yeah.
Different types prioritize those differently. So for me, a lot of the meditation is just not doing, first of all, and just emptying my mind. I've been trying to do 10-minute meditations, keep my eyes closed, and just um, trying to get to some state of mindfulness. And 9 out of 10 times I fail, but that 1 out of 10 times is really great. Not really. My success rate's going up over time, but I mean, a lot of it for me is just the consciousness to do it and to be mindful of what's going on while I'm in that process.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I mean, this happened yesterday. I had a time period where I was with some other family members, and I had to like sort of take some time to say, okay, I'm just going to be present here, and I'm not going to be doing whatever I'm thinking about tomorrow, and I'm not going to be planning something that's happening in February, but I'm just going to be trying to let go and focus on this moment.
Mm.
And so I think that's meditative, whether you're meditating or not, just trying to be mindful of what's going on. And it's a mixed bag in terms of the results in a lot of cases. Elise has given me a lot of feedback lately that she goes, we talked about this. And apparently when we talked about it, I was not present for the conversation in my mind. And it's not been a one-time thing. It's been a number of things in the last probably month. And so I just am trying to think, okay, what's going on with me that I'm not able to be as present, and then just spending some time practicing being present more so I can hopefully open that up more. I think the pandemic has been, it's been challenging for everyone. I think it's challenging in different respects for different people. For me, a physical attendance at, for example, an AA meeting could be extremely helpful for me becoming more mindful of what's going on around me. Because you don't sit in a meeting like that and look at a device, or you're a captive audience, and you're listening to the other people in the room. And a lot of the digital world that we've been forced into experiencing the last 6 months, it's pretty easy to multitask. It's pretty easy not to be in tune with what's going on with the people who are speaking. So I think I've realized just recently how much I need to generate some experiences that help me to settle more and just be more mindful and meditative going through life.
Well, the good news is up here in Maine, started having indoor meetings, so you could always fly up for a weekend and go to some meetings with us.
They don't want us up there. Come on, you guys are still leading in
We
being
we are. We're in the
safe.
lead. We got to lead something that's good as that. Well, so the other thing I just wanted to ask about is like if you've noticed this in yourself, sometimes eights will describe something that triggers them is when people um, act weak or helpless and don't take charge of a situation or at least confront it. It's like somehow they go into I don't just into I'm weak and I don't know what to do and sort of give up all their power or get whiny or and so I wondered for you as a type A if that's a great trigger and wake up call for yourself just to be present or what you notice about those sorts of moments when people go into to victim mode in their own particular way.
Yeah, for sure. I have extremely low tolerance for the answer being someone else's problem, both in my own life and in the lives of those around me. So I have to be careful. Um, Again, I'm fortunate that I have a bunch of people around me who will help me get perspective on that. But I just, I tend to be very triggered by a situation where people are seeing a challenge or a problem and blaming it all on some other thing or party. Um, and there's all kinds of messages behind that, right? For me, there's the, well, I have to produce all the energy and make all these things happen all the time. So, why do you think I would tolerate you not being that way also type of message, um, which is a false message to begin with, in terms of my having to make the world spin. The world will spin with or without me. And it's important for me to remind myself of that very frequently. Um, I think, practicing needing people for me, like that's another one of the type 8 ironies is we have this completely independent, I don't need anybody to do anything while we're surrounded by people who are helping us do things, right? So here we are putting off this energy that says, we don't need any of you to do anything, which is completely false. We're good. We're in fact, lots of type 8s are in fact very good at helping people rally around things and get things done, but because they can do that with other people around them. So it's a big trigger of mine for people to not take responsibility. One of the things I do a little bit of a training session when I start to work with somebody, either a client or a staff person or fellow team member, I kind of do a little bit of a like, here's how to deal with me at times thing.
Uh-huh.
And I will say, one of the things that will be helpful, I think, is to take ownership of a problem. It's really useful for me to see other people doing that. So if someone on our team makes a mistake, I try to coach them like, look, the first thing to do is say, like, raise your hand and say, hey, I made a mistake. All right, cool. We're starting at like an acceptance of reality, and then we'll go from there. And there's not a big, I don't feel like I have a strong motivation that people can't make mistakes. I have a strong motivation that people need to claim responsibility for it when they make a mistake, including myself. And if people are spending all their time defending against why the mistake is not a mistake or something, I just tend to focus, I just laser in on that, and I won't let go until we acknowledge that, which I don't think that's always very healthy, but I do think from a usefulness of dealing with me, I just say, just own it first and then we'll move on. Because I feel like in a lot of cases, I just want acknowledgement and then I want to move to a very practical solution. And if we can't acknowledge, then I feel like we can't often get to the solution that we need to. I have some other gifts in my life in terms of people. One of them is someone I work with all the time who probably sees things in many ways very opposite from me, and in particular in this respect. He's a type 5 and he's busy mapping out the world and the system of how we got there. And he's kind of detached from that system in a lot of cases. So I appreciate the balance of that. And at the same time, it causes a lot of conflict for us at times. Because there are times when you just want to just deal with the practical reality, not this vague system reality. And I have to do work around appreciating what he brings, and at the same time knowing when to bring the energy that I bring to a situation.
Well, it's always so amazing to see that other types inhabit a different universe, and it's like, why do you inhabit that universe? It makes I have a better one over here. If you just come over here, we would really be like. But I was just thinking of there's this guy Brian Swim, amazing scientist, Type 5, did a movie called Journey of the Universe. It's really a beautiful movie. But he was speaking at the IEA conference several years ago, and he said, "Yeah, I'm a self-identified Type 5, and the truth is, I had to wait 20 years before I felt like I had enough information to come forward and be public. And so for 20 years, I said I just worked in my room, accumulating information, and then finally, somehow I got out the front door. And now I've written books, and now, but that's just where I go. I accumulate. I have these paradigms, and so it's like both a blessing and a curse. When we have that different world, and it's really points to how challenging it is. Certain types we can feel like,
Yeah.
yeah. So that said, let's see what else I wanted to just ask about. Was it
Well,
my turn? Go ahead.
Well, I just had a comment on that. I think that's one of the less vocalized type 8 issues, maybe in some cases, is just our pace. My expectation is now for basically everything. So Elise will joke that if I pitch to her to do something, she'll say no right away, no matter what. Like, it does not matter what it is.
Yeah.
And the reason is because if she says yes, then it will go forward at a pace that she may not be ready for, may not want, and may not be on board with. So I just, when I decide to do something, I move aggressively towards it quickly.
Yeah.
And I think just being aware of that, there's types that kind of hang with that and do well with that, and there's types that are not. I tend to get along in that respect, type 3s and type 7s and type 8s. We're frequently sort of like partners in crime in that MO. And just the realization of like, all right, I need to make sure I'm moving at a pace that's also bringing along other people who are involved in this process. I can find myself way out in front on something and turning around and going, where is everybody? Like, here we are, and all by myself.
Yeah.
Instead of with the people who I love and who I work with and who I care about. So just being mindful of that pace part of my type 8ness is really important.
Yeah, I have a couple other type 8 guys I work with, and they say something very similar. It's like, when it's decided, well, how come we haven't done it? Like, we decided it, so why isn't it finished? And it's almost like their time frame is, okay, I just see where we're going now, and all of a sudden it's like right now, the immediate right now is like the living truth of their experience, and they're like in it, and it's like they're on the jet plane going towards it, and they look around and go, well, you guys didn't even jump on the plane yet. What's happening here? But it's like almost like a visceral gut experience.
Yeah, I've definitely learned. I oftentimes spend time slowing down in that moment and just clarifying what this all means. So I'll say, okay, now that we've decided on this, here's what I'm thinking this means in the future. And like sort of taking my time and outlining that, okay, this week we're going to do that, and next week, and I expect by 3 weeks from now, this will all be done. And then this, and that's largely a self um, it's a self-protective exercise, but it also helps the people around me, because
Mm.
at some point when I start doing that, somebody will say, well, wait a minute. I know we decided this, but I'm not sure that's what I thought it meant or when I thought it meant it. And it just kind of helps us to state the future in a way that I can right size my own expectations, as well as help people know kind of where I'm thinking about going and what this will all look like.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Yeah, so again, that's mindfulness and practicing mindfulness around your inherited patterns, which the instinctual nature of the age is, let's go. I mean, not tomorrow, not now, let's go now. I mean, that should be a bumper sticker. Let's go
Yeah.
now. So that, I think I want to just ask about is, a lot of the aides I work with, where their soft spot shows up is healthy aides where is their love of their family and just kind of just a deep appreciation, love, protectiveness. I want to make creating loving connections at home seems to be something that really touches them and moves them. And I just wondered what your experience has been like in that regard.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. So I left home when I was 17 and did not have a close relationship with my parents or siblings for many years. And so there's this hollowed out part of my existence um, that I certainly wanted to be different when I had my own family. So Elise and I have 4 kids. They are 20, 27, 24, 21, and 18. And yeah, my relationship with each of them, and the 2 older ones are married and their spouses, is just incredibly important to me. My oldest son has a grandson, or has a son now, so I have a grandson. And just those relationships are like unbelievably sacred. I mean, they're the ones that I um, show up for the most, that I want to be present for. And I certainly haven't done it flawlessly, but I think they all know how important that is um, to me in my life. And I've shared with them a lot the difference in my experience compared to their experience, and how even when I was much, much younger, the image I had and wanted in my family was an experience I'm living out in a lot of ways now, in terms of intimacy with those with everyone in my immediate family. And it's a very, like, I think of it as a very this is, I don't know if this is a healthy or not healthy way of thinking about it, but it's very much us and them. Like it's a we're in this together period type situation. Like, all other things be damned, like this is the unit.
Yeah.
And I think I'm aware that other people don't have that same view of their immediate family compared to everything else in the world.
Mm.
I think at times, sometimes that causes me to think differently about friendships than other people do. But I really love that experience that I have with my immediate family. And the softness definitely comes out. We had a really funny family experience where um, they surprised me for my birthday a couple of years ago. We went to a restaurant, and the kids had all written, kids and Elise had written little letters to me, expressing things they appreciated. And when that was all done, I tried to share um, just how that made me feel, and just how my life had evolved to this point where I was with them in this experience. And I was just choking up like you wouldn't believe. And then I started laughing, so I was crying and laughing at the same time.
Mm.
And then the waiter was coming over and asking like how everything was going, and I was just a mess.
Oh.
Um, so it was hilarious, and we all joke about it to this day, because it was like the most awkward, intimate,
Oh.
exposure of a soft side of me.
Mm.
I was like, yeah, I can't even do that without being awkward about it. But it really just brought up how much of that softness comes out around them
Mm.
compared to the
Beautiful.
rest of the world.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story, really. Well, I was thinking of I love the sports world for a number of different reasons, but one is to get to see the types in action. So there's a quarterback for Seattle who I believe is a type 8. Just beautiful, valiant, courageous, scrappy type 8, which is, I think it's either his first name or his last name is Russell. But he's just like, and if you ever hear him speak about, Black Lives Matter or any kind of social justice stuff, he's like right on the front and just bold as can be, but also just really loving people. And there's him, and then there's this other guy for the Trailblazers, Damian Lillard, who's a remarkable type 8 basketball player he has such a magnanimous heart. Everybody loves him, and he's just an advocate for everyone having a better life, as he's, just this stunning basketball player and rap musician. And then, of course, LeBron James is another beautiful type 8 who has that kind of courage and fighting for justice and magnanimousness. And then I've seen Serena Williams, the tennis player, the most extraordinary tennis player that's ever existed, I think, is another just fiery women's right advocate, fighting for everybody. But I just wondered for you, do you ever find yourself, sort of appreciating other 8s in your life and going, wow, that's a beautiful 8? Anybody that comes up for you?
Oh yeah, I have lots of those. Like you mentioned, I identify with them quickly and easily. I oftentimes am like, oh, that person. I think my radar is up pretty high for hearing it, and I just get enamored and just love seeing those examples. Russell Wilson, I really like you bringing up that one, but just an amazing person.
Yeah.
And just I find it interesting to watch some of the commentators about things like that too, because they don't always know what to do with that type 8 energy that comes out. It is very magnanimous in certain situations, and then it's also dangerous. I saw a little article about Shaq, and I don't know what type Shaq is, but it was an article about him. He used to like take rookie players who weren't making a lot of money compared to him and buy them suits, for example, and he would put a down payment on a car for them. He would just make sure that their experience was really good, even though they didn't feel like the ultimate superstar basketball player like he was. And I can really relate to that, just wanting to care for those around me in a lot of ways. So I identify with a lot of those stories of just seeing people who are advantaged and privileged for whatever reason, being able to care for those who are not. And it's not always about externals and about wealth. It's just about being able to give what you have freely without needing something back, and just be able to care for people in that way. And I think, I always resonate with that. Well, that's probably a tangent story, but in our political climate, there's not a lot of stock being put in those kinds of traits from my perspective.
Yeah.
And on both sides of the aisle, I think, the job is to make yourself look good. And I really appreciate when I see leaders who are consciously taking care of those around them in a certain way.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Like if you look at the trajectory of the 8, when I'm healthy, I have this really bountiful, generous, really caring, compassionate heart. And as I'm less healthy, I cement up. I become more emotional connections become less available, and then I actually can't feel what happens or how I affect people, and I become even more without conscience. I mean, if you can't feel your heart, you're not going to have a conscience. I mean, they go together. But we're seeing really certainly the worst of a lot of different 8 patterns and other types. And then there's those who are awake and really beautiful. So, boy, it's quite a stage to watch people. And so Well, just before we go, just appreciating everything you shared, and if you had, this is always an impossible question. Like someone will say, "Well, what would you say to the type 4 that might help them?" I say, "Well, just like work on yourself about 30 years, and then things will really start to make sense." Because it's not like one thing you can do, but anything that comes to mind for you in terms of, how to help the 8 or how to help people more compassionately understand their patterns, anything that just pops up on the surface for you?
Yeah, that made me think of a couple things. One is when I turned 40, um, my wife had gathered some thoughts from some friends, and a number of them said that their hope for me in future decades was that I could relax.
Hmm.
And so I think, um, man, it is hard. Part of my addiction was, alcohol enabled it so I could relax. And I have a very hard time doing that naturally. So I think for a lot of type 8s, just learning how to get to experiences that will help them to be softer physically and um, emotionally are really important. And that's some of those family activities that we try to put together within our family and other relationships with friends that just give me a chance to be rather than trying to do so much. Um, and I think that, I mean, for me, it has always come back to some version of, man, you do not need to run the world. And so reminding myself that frequently is pretty helpful.
Yeah.
So just the physical, or not the physical, but the mental image of, like, I think of this globe and I'm spinning the globe and I'm like keeping the world going, and just kind of having this image of, like, you do not need to touch that globe in order for the world to continue.
Yeah.
And at least for me, the freedom that gives when I stop trying to spin the globe and control everything, man, I become much more able to have sort of a um, it's hard to describe. It's not less authoritative necessarily. It's not less energetic. It's not less power oriented, but it's way less different in the way it feels to people when I'm able to be relaxed and not feeling like I have to run the world. And probably one other thing is just the ability to genuinely realize it's perfectly okay to need people, and in fact, you would be robbing yourself um, of true life if you cannot get to a place where you're okay needing those around you and being able to be vulnerable with them and expressing that. None of that's easy, but I find it to be helpful, even if it's just a pretty regular reminder of life. Some of that is prayer practices for me. Some of that is a little bit of the meditation thing. Exercise is kind of a double-edged sword because I can be really intense about that, but when I can hold it loosely, I think that can be really helpful for me. But I think my overall message would be, man, just go easier on yourself as a type 8 for those that are out there. We are so driven and so caught up in needing to be that way that being able to relax and go easier is much healthier for you and better for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the presence you brought to this, and your transparency and your beautiful heart. So just very grateful to have you in my life, and look forward to our continued conversations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm grateful for you too, Michael. You've been a spectator for a lot of the journey.
Well, it's been quite a privilege for me. So, and also always a teaching for me too. So, as my teacher says, Michael, don't forget, we are all crawling on our hands and knees together to redemption. So we're in this thing together. So anyway, well, many blessings to you.
Love that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.